come check out your Jubilee Church app. There was also a website you saw up there you can register on, but it's easier from the app probably. Check that out. Register as soon as possible. If you have any questions, let us know. It's really important. Also, what's coming up this week, you may have heard us talk about our friends Scott Marks and Reese Scott. These are guys who are part of our international family of churches, both of them fighting for their lives with cancer. And so we are kind of standing together, and this Wednesday, the 24th, we're having a day of fasting to really ask God for healing over their bodies. And so you can join us in that. You'll be getting more information this week leading up to that if we have your email address, so look for that. Today we've got our Growth Track Class 3. We've got some sign-ups already, but the good news is even if you're not currently signed up, you can still go. Be held right back here in one of these meetings, food provided, so it'll be a great time. All right, those are the details. That's what's happening around here. But today we're going to be continuing in our sermon series on work. I think it's been great. If you've missed the past couple of weeks, I would strongly encourage you to check out those sermons. They're really good, really applicable to life today. And so I'm excited today. My friend Craig is going to be sharing with us. And if you didn't know Craig, there's a lot of things I could say about him that would describe him. One of those things would be this guy knows how to work. He knows about work. And so he's got some good things to share with us today. So please help me in welcoming Craig to the stage.
Hey, everybody. Good morning. How y'all doing? Great. I'm doing good. You know, it was beautiful yesterday. And then, so I'm talking about the problems with work. And so the weather is perfect setting for this topic. It got cold again. It's raining again. It's cloudy. It's just kind of dreary. You want to go to sleep. You definitely don't want to work. And so that's the background and the backdrop for just fitting. I think last week it was beautiful, and Bryce got to talk about work's original design, and that we were all made in the image of our Creator God, who is he's a worker. He's a creator of things, and work is a good thing. And then we did some stuff that kind of took that and off of its original design. So Bryce talked about that, and so today we're gonna kind of learn about what happened. And some of we're going to kind of go through 3 problems with work today. And I'll just tell you what they are. It's that work can be fruitless, it can be pointless, and it can become an idol. So we're going to work through those things together. But before we get started, I do want to let everybody know about something you may have seen. I know we've announced it a couple times, but the Difference Maker Celebration. This is the first time we've ever done something like this. We have about 80 difference makers here inside Jubilee that serve on Sundays and throughout the week, but we also have another 40 or so employees of Revive, our consignment stores here in Woodstock and Smyrna that are difference makers as well, and we're bringing all of them together for a big celebration on the 5th of May. We've got a venue right down the street on Highway 92. We've got dinner, we're going to have dancing and music and a lot of fun times. If you're a difference maker, we want you there. This is a huge thank you, a huge party to celebrate all that you do in this place and how grateful we are for you. You just got to let us know you're coming. You can RSVP for that, either using the communication card in the seat back or the app that Aaron talked about. There's a square. That's the easiest way. Just let us know you're coming. We want to see you there on the 5th of May. All right, so I got to make sure I say that. So check that box. Boom. Okay, so every time I get up, whether it's to welcome or do announcements or even preach here, I have to ask myself, why am I doing it? I grew up in and out of church, but I grew up in the South, so I know what church culture is all about. I've been here practically almost every Sunday for the last 6 years, and then serving in most of those. So there gets to be a point where I have to really guard myself to make sure I'm not just showing up. So in order to do that, I ask myself every Sunday, why am I doing this? What is this all about? And as I was thinking about that today, I think God was just saying that our journey on this earth is one where we are basically repairing our own misunderstandings of who God is, how much He loves us, and what He wants for us. We're in a constant state of repairing that misunderstanding. because of sin in our hearts. Now, you may not know God at all. You may be as far from understanding who he is and how much he loves us. And so you've got a lot of misunderstandings, or you could have been following him for close to 80 years, and you're still going to have misunderstandings because we're human, and that's part of our lot. And so as I was thinking about work and really why spend 4 weeks of a year talking about work, it really came clear that that's why. Because God wants to reshape how we think about work, just like he wants to reshape how we think about family, how we think about faith, how we think about the culture that we live in, how we think about government, how we love on people. We're in a constant state of reshaping that. And so that's the hope today, that as we evaluate, like, what are the problems with work, that God is intentionally teaching us, what do we need to relearn? What do we need to reshape when we think about what it is that we do? And it doesn't matter what it is. You could be a student and you're working. You could be a stay-at-home mom and you're working with your kids. You could be in the workplace. You could be a pastor like Bryce. All of these things are work. We work in every aspect of life every single day. And so one of the things that I have struggled with the most when it comes to work and really in life in general is the compartmentalization. I don't know if anybody else has problems with that, where you can take every little aspect of your life and kind of treat it in this individual bubble. This is what I do at work, and this is who I am at work. This is my role as a father. This is my role as a husband. This is my role as when I'm a sports fan, I do this. All of these little things are disconnected and compartmentalized, and we are different people in a way. And I think culture wants that from us. Culture wants to compartmentalize our lives into things that are, it's kind of like if there are rooms to a house, it wants you to just scurry around from all the different rooms, and it keeps you distracted. So I kind of look at compartmentalization as I've gotten older, as it's like a cancer. It's a disease that we have, because God's intention for us wasn't to just treat our sections of our lives differently. He wants to come into all of them together. But this cancer spreads. It dominates. And I personally, work has been kind of the one leading part of this disease that I've seen in my life, where I can be honestly different people in those places, depending upon what work has for me. So I'm trying to hope that we can break down some of those walls, that we do view our life as one thing, and that we don't compartmentalize. And I hope that that's what we can do today, that culture is trying to compartmentalize, but Christ tries to connect all these things together. And so, like I said, we're going to work through, work becomes fruitless, it becomes pointless, and it reveals our idols. So we're going to pick up where Bryce left off in Genesis. So this is the origin story of, if God is a creator, he made us in his image to be creators. He put us on earth. He said, name things, be fruitful, multiply, and everything was going in a good direction. Everybody was happy in the Garden of Eden. They were in communion with God, and then something went wrong. And so we're going to pick up in Genesis 3:16 through 18. And so Adam and Eve have just eaten from this tree that God said, don't eat from this tree. And they ate from the tree. And so there was consequences that came into the creation because of that. And here are the consequences that God said. He said, to the woman, he said, I'll make your pains in childbearing very severe. With painful labor, you will give birth to children. Your desire will be for your husband, and he will rule over you. And to Adam, he said, because you've listened to your wife and ate fruit from the tree about which I commanded you, you must not eat from it. Cursed is the ground because of you. Through painful toil, you will eat food from it all the days of your life. It will produce thorns and thistles for you, and you will eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your brow, you will eat your food until you return to the ground, since from it you were taken. For dust you are, and to dust you will return. And so the Bible paints this picture that originally work was a good thing. It's part of our DNA. And we were going to use our gifts and our resources to take care of this garden and enjoy the kind of dominion of earth. You know, the Bible talks about subduing it and enjoying it. But now it's cursed because of mankind's fall. And work now exists in a world that God sustains, but that sin disordered. Okay, and I think that's an important thing to acknowledge, that when we look at the world around us, God is holding it together, but it's disordered. It's not as it was intended to be. It's kind of like a boat, right? Like a boat in its perfect setting, it's in water, and if a boat is in water and the motor's working and the steering, everything's working, it's going to do its thing, right? It's going to drive around the water. But if you take that boat and you sit it on land, it's going to do nothing. It can't do anything. And that's kind of like what we're doing, is that ultimately we were designed to know, serve, and love God, but because of sin, that we've lost our ability to operate in that natural place of where we should be. So Adam and Eve, they sinned against God. They experienced this eternal shame, guilt, brokenness, and they suffered the natural consequences of working against their design. So again, as I started, I think He's trying to reshape. He wants us to come back to that original design. He doesn't want us to work against it. He wants us to work with it. So in Genesis 3:7, after the fall, Adam said they realized they were naked, right? This is opposite of what was originally spoken, that they were naked and unashamed. And so we're seeing in the world, this contemporary culture, they try to account for this shift of in Adam's language, they realized they were naked. They went from never feeling shame, never feeling guilt, to ultimately feeling that, coming short of it. And culture has tried a lot of different ways to find and deal with that restlessness. But what we know here is that restlessness is at its root, it's because of sin. And that root is really a separation between God. And so it's really interesting to watch Adam. We see this in our own lives. Like when we mess up, one of the tendencies is to blame the other person. Even though when I do something wrong, like I can immediately try to know, well, actually it's your fault because you did this and it caused me to do that. And Adam does the same thing, right? When Adam, he's the one that ate the fruit, and then he's like, wait a second, no, it wasn't me. He tells God, it's the woman you put with me. She gave it to me, and I ate. It wasn't my fault. It's really your fault, God. And so you just start to see how silly some of these things and how things start to unravel when sin entered the picture. And so Paul even uses the language in the New Testament. He says that the whole creation has been groaning, subject to bondage and decay. And I think we see that around us as well today. Genesis 3 it's an ancient text. It's an ancient story, thousands and thousands of years old, but it couldn't be more relevant and practical to today and what we experience as we go about life and work. It really says it takes the two of life's greatest tasks. We spend most of our time working and with people, so working and loving. And the fall touched both of those. In childbearing, God said, hey, that's going to be super painful. And if you take that out, actually the whole raising of children is it's life-giving and fun, but it's very painful at times. Very painful. So loving one another, not easy anymore. Takes a ton of work. So the fall touched our human relationships, and the fall touched our work, what we spend most of our time doing. And this explains why. So when people walk around and they're not connected with any kind of belief in a creator God and in the scripture, and they're restless with, why are my relationships, why is it so hard to love? Why is work so hard? Why can't I find satisfaction in this life in any place that I look? We have to remind ourselves we know why that is, and it happened in this moment. So both childbearing and farming are now called in Scripture painful labor. And you can actually look at many different languages across the globe. And it's interesting that the word for toil, which they use in Scripture, and childbearing, it's both labor. And I never really thought about that. That's kind of interesting. You're in labor when you're having a baby, and you are doing labor when you're working. And it's just this reminder that we need to think and ask God, what is it you want me to know, or how do you want me to think about these things? So we see now kind of shifting into like just work in general and this idea of labor. We see companies assemble teams now. They work for months and months to try and give birth to new products or ventures, which they may die, quick deaths in the marketplace. You've got football players who will spend their entire lives pouring themselves into a sport that they may just wind up injured, and that may ruin the rest of their physical life. You've got entrepreneurs like Steve Jobs who start a company, build it to be something the world has never seen, only to get kicked out of the thing. I don't know if you guys know that story, but they forced him out because they weren't quite making as much as they had hoped for, and they were rubbing heads there. So you can be Steve Jobs and still get kicked out of your own company. You're looking around at all the things that we make, whether it be computers, whether it be, and now like they're awesome gifts, but if you're on like a Windows machine, you're going to get viruses all the time. Even those things don't work. You've got things like the atom, right? We pour all this work into understanding the atom, only for our understanding of that atom then to go on and produce something called the atom bomb. And so work is this mixture. It's this toil. It's this labor that we can do everything possible, but it might bear some fruit, but it's always going to be painful. So when we think about labor, we do think about pain, and it's accurate. It's what we experience in this life. And so, as Bryce was talking about last Sunday, work isn't the curse, but as Genesis said, that it will produce thorns and thistles, right? It's going to be a painful experience as we try to engage and do this thing called work. And so one of the chapter headlines, we're using a book called Every Good Endeavor by Tim Keller. And one of the chapters is called Work is Fruitless. And interesting, he starts to reference this story called Leaf by Niggle. Okay, that's a funny name, Leaf by Niggle. It's by J.R.R. Tolkien, who wrote Lord of the Rings. What's interesting about his reference in this, and it just gave me confidence that, okay, maybe I should be up here talking about this one particular thing, is 2 months ago, I get this random email, totally random, from an author who I haven't received anything from him in years. He kind of went dark. And about 2 months ago, out of the blue, first email, and he's talking about the struggles of work. And so I'm reading it, and he's basically references this Leaf by Niggle thing. I'd never heard of it. I'd heard of Lord of the Rings. I'm kind of familiar with Tolkien's work in general, but I'd never heard of this. And so I click the link, and I start reading it, and it's a beautiful little short story. It's about 10 pages long. I would encourage everybody to go read it. Leaf by Niggle by Tolkien. And basically it's this story of this painter. And he in his mind, he lives in this little cottage and he's got this neighbor, but in his mind, he sees this beautiful mountainside, country pastured picture. And its centerpiece is this big tree. And he can see it in his mind. And so as a painter, he's trying to recreate this. But every day, he starts to paint. And all he can get through is this one leaf. And it goes on to describe that this leaf was perfect. It was a beautiful leaf. But he'd paint the leaf, and he'd come back the next day, and he thought, it's just not quite right. And he started on like a paper size, but he ended up going and turning his whole house almost into a canvas, because that's how big it needed to be to capture this picture that was in his mind. But every time he went to paint, he started with that leaf, and he could never get past it. And as soon as he kind of finished the leaf and think that, okay, I'm ready to go to a branch, he'd always get a knock from his neighbor. And his neighbor always needed help with something, whether it was patching the roof of his house or fixing something, or his neighbor's wife was sick and needed to go get medicine. Every time he got so close to feeling like that leaf was complete, there was some big interruption. And this goes on for his entire life. Ultimately to the point where the neighbor comes and knocks on the door, and I told you about he fixes the roof. He ends up using part of his painting canvas to go fix the roof of his neighbor's house. And you think, oh, that's pretty nice of the guy. But he was not happy with this. He did not enjoy doing it. All it was for him was another kind of example of, this is pointless, I'm pointless, my life is pointless. I can't get past this one leaf. I can see this picture and this frustration's building and building and building. And ultimately, it gets to the point where he's trying to paint this picture. He's got his neighbor bothering him all the time. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, comes this passion, this drive. He starts talking about, I got to go on this journey. I got to prepare for this journey. Ultimately, this journey is his journey to heaven, the afterlife. Once he dies, he's got to get ready for it. But all this stuff is swimming around, and he ends up trying to go get medicine for this lady. He gets sick, and he ends up dying. And you'll have to read the rest of the story to see all the intricacies, and I'll pick up how it ends later. But it was, what I found so beautiful about this story is, one, it's very relatable, right? I think a lot of us, no matter where you're at in life, have imagined something bigger than what you've ever achieved. And you may have tried to achieve it, but you can't. I certainly had resonated with that in this painting. But what was even more interesting is that this story, Tolkien wrote it because that's exactly how he felt. He was writing, I can't remember Alec would know which book he wrote first. I don't know. Whatever book it was, the first one, he couldn't finish it. You know, inside these books are like whole languages that the elves spoke, and whole songs and different like handwriting. So he envisioned this thing that was enormous. And he'd work on it. I think he had been working on it for 10 years. And he's like, I'm never going to finish. I'm never going to finish this. So he wrote this little short story almost to like get through writer's block. And so I just thought that was a beautiful picture too, because he ended up creating something very beautiful out of a place of wanting where his work was very fruitless. Could you imagine spending 10 years on something like a book that no one has ever seen, right? And the struggle that you might feel as you try to finish that work in something as big as what Tolkien did. And so that's where that painting came from. And I tell that story because that is life in our work. A lot of times, we can see what we want. We can imagine it. We know there's more, but all we're managing to do is paint the same leaf over and over and over again. And we certainly have the neighbor that's taking us away, whatever that thing might be, and we get caught up in that. Those are the thorns and the thistles that Scripture talks about. They come out of the ground, and the good news is that it says there are going to be thorns and thistles, but we do get to eat from the ground. We're going to get some plants and some fruits. So there's work is both fulfilling, we're going to get something from it, but it's going to be frustrating along the way. And it's interesting to me that God kind of designs it where he gives us just enough of the fulfilling part to go along with the thorns to keep us going. He gives us a glimpse of the beauty and genius that might have been part of just a routine characteristic of work had the fall not happened. And so we're trying to recapture that. And Nigel, he imagined this beautiful tree that he would never be able to produce and paint in his life. And so he died actually crying on the picture. And the work of his life was not complete. No one would ever see it. And yet, in the end, I'm going to keep teasing it out, that basically God is invited him to trust the story. That what you think you're doing here amidst the thorns and the thistles that come with work, God's invitation is, will you trust me that it's going to matter? And so, as Christians, we do have our hope in God's story of redemption for the world. And I think about this a lot in several aspects of life. I think about it with marriage. I think about it with raising kids. I think about it with work. How hard all of those things would be without knowing the redemptive love of Jesus. Like, seriously, when it gets down to it, why do any of those things if there's not a hope for it? And luckily we have that. We have that hope for the future. And as Bryce talked about, work is a good thing, and it's a service, and we get to do it. So one of the big problems with work is it can feel fruitless, right? It can feel fruitless. We see it in Genesis. We understand why it can be that way, and it's something that we live with. I think what we have to realize is there's both fruit and thorns amidst it all. And we'll move on to point 2 here, that work can become pointless. So it can be fruitless, and it can be pointless. So whereas fruitless, you might be working really hard and not seeing anything come from it. Pointlessness is when you work really hard and you actually see something come from it and it doesn't satisfy. So we have, in the fruitless, we might hope for these skills. We might hope for these outcomes, and they just never come. But in the pointless ones, we hope for these skills and we get them, and we hope for that outcome and it happens. And then what? And so I got to experience this early in my career. I worked at a place called Blink Media. We were one of the first 3 people in the world to kind of build this ad technology at the birth of social media. Looking back, not a great idea. Not good for human flourishing by any means. But we didn't know that so much back then. We thought social media was a gift to society. We thought it connected people well. And this technology it allowed for really the advertising engines that you see on social now to be birthed. And it was one of those moves where I'd been at an ad agency for about 8 years, 7 years, something like that. And this opportunity came up. It was kind of the boom of the startup world. It was very much that tech startup feel. I think I was employee number 10, so you join this really scrappy company that everybody's doing a lot of things. You're involved in this technology space with Google and Facebook and all these guys, and there's just a real energy and vibe about it that was really fun. And it was very satisfying, and I got to use skills that I developed in building this thing, and we got different accolades over time. The technology got better, our team got bigger, we got more opportunities, and it was wild. It was very much like a tech movie that you'd see. What is the one, the Network or something like that they did on Facebook? I mean, it was very much like that reality. I'm traveling to different cities. I got to see basically every major city in the country through work, and you just think that this is going to be it. It's actually working. I took this risk. We had just had our first child, and so huge risk going from stable 7-year thing to this startup where you're dependent upon just raising money, but it was working, and it was growing, and you're getting to see all this stuff. And then, in that world, you're really building the company to sell it. That's the idea. And so we kept running it, and lo and behold, we got to the point where we did. We sold the business. And all of that, if I were to sit down when I said yes to the job, it really did accomplish everything I thought it could in terms of challenge, in terms of experience, and of what it would be like. It did all those things. And then it sold. And that's when things go sideways. And so I won't bore you with all the details, but the lesson learned, you got to read contracts, okay? You got to read contracts. Because when we sold the business, even though I was like employee number 10, and the whole time we're building this thing, there's a financial return that you're pouring all this into that you're hoping for. And there's different series of stocks and all this kind of stuff. And basically, I was on the first tier after the people that got all the money when we sold it. So I think I walked away with like $5,000 for like 7 years of building like a $100 million company. And it was super painful. That was painful. I wasn't there just for the money, but that definitely stung. And the worst part, though, is through the acquisition, we were purchased by this giant company, $5 billion publicly traded company, and everything changed after that. The culture changed. There were some very, very poor moral decisions by leadership that ultimately put me in a place that I was like, I got to leave. I got to walk away. And so I did do that. And as I reflect on it now, I'm like, that was pointless. I really feel that way. I mean, I did gain some experience. I'm taking from it that experience. But you want to talk about feeling like your time, effort, and talent was pointless. That was it for me. I poured, all kinds of hours, all kinds of sacrifice into this thing, and it didn't pay off, honestly, in any way. It was pointless. So I can resonate with some, you'll hear quotes. There's a famous one from Jim Carrey, who he talks about, he wishes that everyone could get everything they ever wanted so that they could realize that's never enough. And that's kind of how I felt with that experience with Blink, is that that changed my dynamic of what work meant when I went through that experience. So the blessing in it is that I got to learn that lesson. So I then started my own company, and I organized it in a way that hopefully would build guardrails so I'd never feel pointless again. And I think that worked. So it was a lesson learned. But I just share that story because work can feel pointless. And in that season, I couldn't tie what I was doing back to anything that had real meaning. And luckily, we have a whole book in the Bible that talks about this very thing in Ecclesiastes. So Ecclesiastes, just a little bit about it. You need to read Ecclesiastes not like you read a letter from Paul. It's not a letter. It's more like a philosophy class. Anybody take philosophy in anywhere in college or in high school? Yeah. You either love it or you hate it. I mean, there's no middle ground on the philosophy stuff. But Ecclesiastes is that. And even the Hebrew word that they use for the main author can be translated the teacher or the philosopher. So the goal of Ecclesiastes isn't to read it and take it as a proverb or take it as a hard fact. It's all these prompting thoughts. It's trying to pull you in to get you to think about things versus tell you about it. And so in the book of Ecclesiastes, the philosopher here, he's trying to find meaning in life. That's the whole point of the book. He's trying to find meaning in life. And he tries 3 different ways to do that. The first, he tries to find meaning through learning and wisdom. And then he tries to find meaning in the pursuit of pleasure. And then in the third one, he tries to find meaning through the pursuit of achievement and hard work. And I'll ruin this story for you. At the end, he concludes that work cannot by itself be meaningful. He said, "So I hated life because the work that is done under the sun was grievous to me, all of it meaningless, a chasing after the wind." And we're going to look at this passage in more detail in just a second. But why would he come to that conclusion? Why would he say that it was all meaningless? It was like chasing after the wind. I can't think of anything more pointless than trying to grab air, right? So that's a rich language. And we talk about being a difference maker here. I told you about the difference maker celebration. We firmly believe that God hardwired humans to want to make a difference. We want to make an impact in what we're doing. And that can mean, it can mean a lot of things. We want to make an impact so we can get personal recognition, or we can make impact because we want to make a difference in our field, or we want to make the world a better place. But we want to feel accomplished. We want to do something that we feel like is going to last. If you do something and it's like a Blink, for example. That business literally doesn't exist anymore. 2 years after being acquired, they just shut it down because it failed. So there's no evidence really, that ever existed. It's gone. And so when you think about achievement, you're really trying to do something that will last. The reality is that here on earth in the work that we do, there really aren't any lasting achievements that you can make. So let's look, Ecclesiastes 2:18 through 20. He's on his third pass at trying to find meaning, and he says, I hated all the things I had toiled for under the sun, because I must leave them to the one who comes after me. And who knows whether that person will be wise or foolish? Yet they will have control over all the fruit of my toil, into which I have poured my effort and skill under the sun. This too is meaningless. So my heart began to despair over all my toilsome labor under the sun. So, when we say there's no lasting achievements, like you can build something and enjoy it while it's here, but then you've got to pass it on. Like you're going to die and it's going to go somewhere. And this guy's saying, I could do everything I want, but then who's to say the next person is going to not just wreck it and ruin it? There's really no positive outcome. Achievement is either going to be, it's going to end at death, or you're going to experience failure while you're here. And so as he's painting this picture, he basically comes to this conclusion that work under the sun, which means on earth, is meaningless because it doesn't last. And so what happens when we realize that is that we can really start to lose hope. It can take away our hope for any kind of future or what we're doing. And then when work becomes pointless, it also alienates us. And I felt that on the back end, those final years of Blink, when you're like, I've invested so much time into this. I don't know why am I even doing it? And it comes back to that compartmentalized piece. It can really start to alienate you when you you feel this way, that work is pointless. And you might be alienated because you know that you're not doing the best that you can. You might feel alone and alienated because what you're doing, it has no real personality. It's kind of a dehumanizing job. Maybe you're behind the scenes. No one ever sees it. And so when you start to view your work as pointless and you're in one of those kind of roles, it can be a real challenge, and it can alienate you from others and from God. You can get alienated due to just working too much. But that's basically what this philosopher is saying, is that work under the sun is meaningless because even if it's in the most successful it could be, you're going to pass it off and you won't know what's going to happen. In Ecclesiastes 4:7-8, he says, there was a man all alone. He had neither son nor brother. There was no end to his toil, yet his eyes were not content with his wealth. For whom am I toiling, he asked, and why am I depriving myself of enjoyment? This too is meaningless, a miserable business. And so he's given a really great picture of what we spend most of our time doing. Is in some form or fashion, it's work. It's non-leisure activity. We spend most of our life doing non-leisure activity. And basically, he's exploring this as a way of trying to find meaning in life. And when it's pointless, I think we all can resonate with that's no fun and that's not going to bring real joy. And then even if you're by yourself, you've got no family, and you work all the time and you've got a bunch of money, it's still at the end of the day, it's like, who am I doing this for? Why am I depriving myself of enjoyment? This too is meaningless. I can't even working too much doesn't get me where I need to be. And work, it can convince you that you're working hard for your family, your friends, while being seduced through ambition to neglect them. And so that's one of the traps of work being pointless too. And you don't know it when you're in it. You really don't. One of the easiest things to actually convince yourself is you're doing the right thing when you're working too hard. I remember in the ad agency world I was in, it was very common to work like 70 plus hours a week. That'd be pretty average. And I remember about 5 years in, you're doing the climb, and this is before laptops were normal, okay? But I remember coming home one day, I was working all the time, and I asked Natalie, my wife, she's sitting right there. I was like, they've given me a choice. I can work longer in the office. I can work more at the office, or they'll give me a laptop and I can work more at home. Which one do you think I should choose? Those are the two options I gave her. Not work that much, right? But I was swept up in it. I was swept up in the ambition. I was swept up in the, I think it was like not for my own gain, but if you know me, and if you ask any of my kids, you say, what's one of the Guffey's core values? And they're gonna say best effort. That's what, it's just inside of me. So I think giving your best is a good thing, but it very much, in my sense, especially back in those days, best effort just meant more and more and saying yes to the point of like, not seeing. I was actually working so much I never saw my wife, and even the options that I gave her were like, work more, or I can work in front of your face. Which one would you like? It was silly, but it does that. Ambition can do that, and ultimately leading to kind of a pointlessness to it all. And one of the driving factors right now that make work so hard to find meaning is actually that we have so many choices to do it. And it's kind of ironic, right? That you'd think that in our day and age, we have the most flexibility in choosing what we want to do, especially where we live right here, right? We're talking suburban lifestyle where, you can pursue any number of things in high school. You can pursue any number of things in college. You get a degree, maybe. And even in today's workforce, degrees are becoming less and less required entry. But any time, at any point, you have an opportunity to change your career. And this concept of choice has really hurt our ability to enjoy what we have. This power of choice has led a lot of young people to pursue careers that don't fit them. I was reading just in prep for this, and there's several studies coming out of Stanford that they're asking the question why, between the 50s and the 70s, our smartest people at these high institutions, if you were to ask them what their number one career choice would be, like the best of the best, they were going to go into, the majority of them wanted to go into education. They were like, I love learning so much, I can communicate it well, I understand it so well, that the highest calling I can have is to go teach other people that same thing. And so as part of this study, they had more and more kids today rank education as the lowest thing that they would ever go into. And they asked why. And there was a quote that said, here it is. It said, I realized that if I used all my talents and stayed in education, I'd be too embarrassed when I got back to my 5-year college reunion, so I'm going to go to law school now. And so all these choices have created this dynamic where people are trying to go and choose something that doesn't fit their gifting, it doesn't fit their talent, it fits this aspirational life that they've created in their mind. And so they're choosing law school, or they're choosing to go work on Wall Street and finance, some of these things. None of those are bad in their own, but we are seeing more and more that because people have so much choice, they're putting so much stock in what they are as a career that ultimately it's only going to lead to dissatisfaction and meaninglessness. And that's one of the problems with work, is that we can try our best to be in a place that we think is going to give us all that we want, and the reality is that it won't. It won't do that. And ultimately, that leads to the third point, which is work becomes an idol. And I think this is a big thing. You could replace work with any number of these things. I'd have the band come up. You could replace the word work with anything in our life, but I thought that this definition was really good. What is an idol? It means imagining and trusting anything to deliver the control, security, significance, and satisfaction that only the real God can give. It means turning a good thing into an ultimate thing. That's what an idol is. And when work is an idol, what it's really saying is, I don't believe God is gracious enough and pleased enough with me that now I have to go find something else to satisfy myself there. And we can replace work with family. We could replace work with anything. And ultimately, that's the question. And that we need to ask ourselves is, the problem with work when it's fruitless, when it's pointless, isn't that you got to go find something where it isn't fruitless or isn't pointless, because the reality is we're all going to experience that in our work. The real thing you have to focus on is it my idol, because when it is either of those things, it's going to disrupt my life. It's going to steal my joy. It's going to take away the meaning in my life. And so I just encourage you guys, as we sing this song, to ask that question. With whatever it is that we've chosen to do, has it turned into turned into an idol where we are placing more trust in it to give us the control, the security, the significance, the satisfaction that really only God can give us? And that can sound like church speak, but it's true. And I'll tell you it's true because I have experienced it. It won't satisfy them. The highest level of success won't satisfy. People won't satisfy. We have a purpose inside of our hearts to go and really to love people. And so as we sing, just ask God, is that me? Where have I placed work in my life? Is it an idol?